You are not born into honor. You are born into mud, debt, and a society where a sword has already decided your place in it. Your family does not own much, but fortunately the tax collector is deeply committed to making that even less of a problem. This is your first lesson in order. The harvest belongs partly to the land, partly to the weather, and very enthusiastically to everyone above you. Then they appear, the warrior class. All posture, steel, and legal permission to make your day dramatically worse. You are told to respect them, which is convenient because they are heavily armed and the law agrees. Wisdom arrives early here. Keep your head down if you want to keep it attached. Your whole life is about to become labor, fear, and the delicate art of staying useful to people who call that peace. You grow the way peasant children often do, quickly, badly, and in direct conversation with exhaustion. Rice is beautiful in paintings, but in real life it is mostly wet labor with back pain. This is the village math problem. If you keep too much, officials get interested. If you surrender too much, you starve. Feudalism loves precision whenever peasants produce something worth taking. Status is taught here the same way weather is learned, constantly and with real consequences. Power does not always need a reason, but it enjoys one when available. Humor survives everywhere, especially where direct honesty would get everyone professionally executed. The economy exists technically, just not in a way that feels particularly designed for your comfort. Family becomes the only place where you are briefly more than labor with a name attached. By now you understand. The field feeds the village feeds the Lord, and dignity must grow in the leftover space. Adulthood arrives the peasant way, not with celebration, but with more weight to carry and fewer excuses allowed. Cooperation keeps the village alive, which is fortunate because the political structure is much more interested in extraction than support. Nothing says rural harmony like an armed audit. You learn one of the great peasant arts, emotional camouflage in front of people legally protected from your opinion. Whenever the elites start arguing at scale, peasants somehow end up donating both food and suffering. Peaceful governance in practice often resembles compulsory logistics with seasonal depression. This is your first useful look behind the costume. The warrior class also bleeds, it is just paid more ceremonially. Authority loves theater, especially when the audience cannot leave and the moral is do not improvise. You grasp the central joke. This entire order depends on you while pretending you are the least important part of it. Then comes marriage, building a household inside a system already trying to eat it. You start your family the traditional way, with labor and absolutely no margin for error. Community keeps you alive, mostly because the government only collects outcomes. Administration has confidence in crops that haven't actually survived yet. Nature joins the governing coalition against your household budget. This is peasant arithmetic. If the harvest fails, your only option is prayer and rationing. The warrior class remains loyal to the principle that your misfortune is no excuse. Compassion exists in theory, one of feudalism's more decorative features. Someone else's stability is built directly out of your hunger, love, labor, and dread. In adult life, they all share the same bowl. Winter arrives like an audit, checking whether the year's suffering was properly organized. Hunger does not always arrive dramatically. Sometimes it just sits down at dinner and refuses to leave. Poverty in the countryside is extremely efficient. It turns every object into inheritance and every meal into negotiation. Feudal peace is wonderful. It guarantees that even famine can be administered on schedule. Your body now serves in every season, field in summer, transport in winter, and anxiety all year round. The hierarchy remains beautifully visible. Scarcity below, reserve above, and honor somewhere in between pretending not to notice. Survival breeds creativity. Unfortunately, power also employs inspectors. Theft from peasants is governance. Peasants protecting themselves is suddenly a moral crisis. This is where obedience hardens. Not into respect, but into the exhausted recognition that open defiance is currently underfunded. You survive another season, which in village terms counts as success and in human terms is a fairly devastating standard. Then the cycle restarts, because suffering in a peasant village is seasonal but never really off-duty. Family expands the usual way, emotionally meaningful and economically necessary at the exact same time. Cooperation keeps the water moving, and the water keeps the rice alive, and the rice keeps the tax structure erotically interested in your continued effort. Governance arrives on horseback to check whether the people in straw sandals are still performing gratitude correctly. Oppression's favorite side effect is making the trapped quarrel horizontally while power remains comfortably vertical. Congratulations, you are now trusted, which in peasant life usually means more work without any exciting legal upgrades. Whenever men with banners make decisions, rice villages begin preemptively regretting the future. Faith remains useful, if only because screaming directly at the sky still has no formal procedure. You finally see the arrangement clearly. You do not simply work the land, you are pinned to it by policy, hunger, and custom-wearing ceremonial confidence. You are doing everything right. Working, enduring, raising a family, obeying the structure, and somehow the structure still treats survival like a privilege it can revise. By now, you are no longer surviving one bad year. You are participating in a long-running system that calls repeated strain stability. This is how feudal order reproduces itself, not through philosophy, but through children learning pain before choice. Local leadership is a special kind of misery, too close to power to refuse it, and too close to peasants to pretend it does not hurt. Scarcity does what swords love doing from a distance. It turns neighbors into temporary enemies, while the hierarchy stays refreshingly above the mud. Cooperation is not moral purity here. It is the only practical alternative to collective starvation. And there he is, the walking reminder that no matter how messy peasant life gets, authority can always make it more symmetrical and worse. Feudal supervision is remarkable. It always arrives in time to demand calm from people it has been systematically pressuring for years. You learn again that emotion must be managed vertically. Fear upward, resentment inward, and jokes only in private if you enjoy breathing. This is the genius of controlled suffering. No chains required if people are too entangled, tired, and watched to move cleanly. You are no longer just enduring the system. You are helping transmit it to the next generation, one exhausted season at a time. Then politics remembers your village exists, which is always terrible timing and never optional. Whenever men of rank start arguing with steel, peasants become logistics with pulse. National security means confiscating food from people already negotiating with hunger professionally. This is your backstage pass. Less poetry, more blood, and expensive failure moving in carts. War from below is just an organized interruption of agriculture. The warrior class is made of organs, and their politics land on your roof. Feudal service is versatile. Farmer, porter, grave handler, whatever the moment requires and dignity discourages. The sword protects order mainly by creating enormous administrative messes for villages to absorb later. You come back wiser in the worst way, having learned that war is simply taxation with bodies added. You never asked to join, yet it recruited your back, your food, and your remaining optimism. After the warriors finish, the village is left to rebuild reality from the leftovers. Recovery is the peasant's specialty. The rice refuses to grow out of sympathy. Administration is a fine art, staying exact while others become desperate. Poverty here is not a failure. It is an expected byproduct of the system. Escape is always a terrible plan competing against an even worse certainty. Freedom has terrible logistics, but obedience has excellent documentation. Duty is feudalism's lock, making people imprison themselves to protect others. It is the ordinary tragedy of loving people inside a system that weaponizes responsibility. The rebellion is theoretical. The labor is immediate. The rice still needs planting. The system survives because it has tied your very conscience to the harvest. Time does not improve the system. It just teaches your spine how to bend in ways ideology finds convenient. Congratulations, the household has successfully reproduced both life and unpaid endurance. Feudal Japan remains deeply committed to precision whenever peasants produce something worth confiscating respectfully. This is your favorite recurring game. arithmetic under threat, where every answer ends with not enough. Nature stays loyal to its long alliance with hierarchy. Both apparently agree peasants should never feel too secure. Authority has excellent timing if the goal is to turn anxiety into a full civic experience. This is how social order gets inherited, not by consent, but by children observing which emotions are survivable. You want to lie, naturally, but the harvest and the taxes are all sitting there listening. By now, suffering no longer feels exceptional, just structured. You have become exactly what the village needed, steady and accustomed to being squeezed on schedule. Then the bad year comes properly, because apparently ordinary hardship was not making the administration feel ambitious enough. Cuisine becomes highly innovative the second starvation joins the household budget. This is the part where survival stops being a plan and becomes a series of increasingly insulting improvisations. Feudal mercy exists in theory, usually just long enough to be denied with impressive politeness. Poverty now enters its final elegant phase, cannibalizing tomorrow to keep today from collapsing publicly. Once famine starts, morality becomes extremely logistical. Nothing stabilizes a starving village quite like reminding it that law still has enough calories to swing a stick. This is the cruel mathematics of hierarchy. Desperation below is always treated as disorder, never as evidence. Love remains present, which is wonderful because food has become mostly conceptual. You survive the famine year the same way villages often do. Partially, bitterly, and with one more layer of belief stripped off the word order. Recovery begins the way it always does, with fewer people, weaker bodies, and the deeply offensive demand to continue as if continuity itself were virtue. Feudal society is efficient at one thing above all, turning tragedy into adjusted workload. By now, endurance has become less a quality and more a trap with muscle memory. Administration is back, which means the system is pleased to report that suffering has once again become taxable. Congratulations, you now perform the unofficial peasant promotion path. More responsibility, same status, dramatically worse emotional workload. The fantasy returns again, as it always does: escape, revolt, vanishing, and as always the logistics remain aggressively unfriendly. This is the mature peasant tragedy. You stop believing in the system long before you stop maintaining the people trapped under it. You are now one of the quiet bodies preventing the system from collapsing into something even hungrier. By now, age has entered the conversation to make every task feel more personal in the joints. You spent your life trying to protect them from hardship, and the system responded by hiring them immediately. You have become useful by learning how to negotiate suffering into slightly more survivable shapes. Every generation eventually produces one man who still believes rage can beat administration. It is usually bad for his health. Wisdom in a village sounds like a list of ways power can make examples out of people you love. Authority regenerates itself on schedule while peasants age like used tools. Submission becomes truly depressing when you see it pass into the next generation without needing explanation anymore. You are now what every village produces: a human brace holding up lives beneath a structure that keeps pretending it deserves gratitude. Time begins transferring your life back into the hands you once trained, which would feel poetic if your knees were not filing such aggressive objections. Authority finally arrives, but only in the village sense. No title, no sword, just everyone asking the old man where the shovel goes. There it is, the timeless peasant question. Are the people above us noble, dangerous, ridiculous, or all three before lunch? Feudal society matures the way all hierarchies do, by replacing some open cruelty with cleaner wording and expecting applause for the upgrade. Legacy in a peasant house is not marble. It is repaired wood, memorized routines, and the ongoing refusal to let the next generation starve immediately. You are still alive, still useful, and now old enough to see that endurance was never noble, just necessary and repeatedly exploited. Then comes the final insult. Your body fails just as you have finally mastered your role. The village continues, unconcerned with whether you feel ready to be replaced. Your body is an archive, every joint a footnote, every scar an unpaid receipt. Even joy here is kept short, never interfering with the irrigation. Succession here is just a transfer of burdens and meticulous rice accounting. The uniforms and horses change, but the hierarchy remains strictly on schedule. Villages are held together by exhausted nobodies too busy for self-mythology. Victory is simply continuation, with enough people left to sit at the mat. In old age, you gain the luxury to judge the whole system accurately from your seat. You fed a world that never called you important. That is your triumph. Eventually, the body retires before the system does, which feels deeply unfair but extremely consistent. You spent your life being necessary, and now the world politely continues without requiring your full participation. There it is again, the timeless question handed down like a family heirloom nobody actually wants. You could say, work hard, obey, endure, phrases that kept you alive and exhausted for decades. Instead, you explain, survive together, share when you can, hide when you must, and never assume fairness. Because honesty ages better than optimism when the stakes are starvation. Every surface here remembers you, even if history absolutely will not. Faith changes too, from asking for miracles to negotiating for stability. The dead are close here, not as legend but as soil with biographies nobody wrote down. You finally see it clearly, not progress, just repetition held together by human effort. In the end, there's no grand recognition, just a room full of people who know exactly what you carried. The greatest luxury you achieved is small, a life that ended in your own space. Dying men are expected to summarize life, which is ambitious considering most of it refused to make sense. Peasants die describing what actually kept people alive. The whole thing returns in fragments, not as a story, but as weather that never passed. And that is how it ends. Not gloriously, but finished after a long negotiation with necessity. No banners or poetry, just people who understand what your life cost. The land takes you back, more sincere than most institutions you served. Mourning is brief because survival remains aggressively scheduled. You are gone, and for the first time, nothing owns your labor anymore. Then history remembers the swords, the castles, and the lords, but politely forgets the people who fed all of them. In this version, everything looks elegant, balanced, and suspiciously free of mud. Reality survives only in fragments, because suffering is terrible branding for heritage. The landscape becomes art once you stop including the people inside it. The person fades first, then the memory, leaving only a system congratulating itself for stability. Power always writes the summary, and it has a strong preference for flattering angles. The clothes change, the language changes, the hierarchy keeps its sense of humor. In the end, the land remembers everything, even when history chooses not to. So, what were you? Laborer, builder, or just another life holding up a system that never planned to remember you? You lived in mud and work, and the world repaid you by calling the era beautiful.